Justin Trudeau is just not having a good few months, maybe not even having a good premiership at all at this stage. He's been reprimanded by Xi Jinping, the Chinese Prime Minister, a few weeks ago. Last week, he had to admit that he was caught out cheating and lying in relation to statements he made about Chinese interference in the Canadian electoral process. This week, his hypocrisy is wholly on show in relation to his statements about protests in China at the moment, about COVID lockdowns and continued zero COVID policy in parts of China. Now, remember that Mr. Trudeau, or President Trudeau, or Prime Minister Trudeau, has been particularly vociferous in wanting to shut down protest in his own country in relation to COVID and lockdown protests over the last few years. Here's what he has to say in terms of protests in China.
Canadians are watching very closely. Obviously, everyone in China should be allowed to express themselves, should be allowed to share their perspectives and indeed protest. We're going to continue to ensure that China knows we'll stand up for human rights, we'll stand with people who are expressing themselves. We also need to make sure that China and places around the world are respecting journalists and their ability to do their job. We'll continue to make that very clear.
That from True North. Isn't that something else all the same to make such a statement? I'll play another video. This is actually Trudeau introducing the Emergency Powers Act to try to suppress protesters in his own country.
Developing headline as we're on the air this evening, north of the border. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau declaring a national emergency now to end the trucker protests and to halt anyone coming from the U.S. to join the protests. Here's our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, now.
Tonight, Canada taking drastic new action to put an end to the so-called Freedom Convoy trucker protests, paralyzing the country's capital city. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoking the Emergencies Act, a never-before-used law granting the Canadian government broad powers, including the ability to remove vehicles and freeze bank accounts.
Occupying streets, harassing people, breaking the law. This is not a peaceful protest. The time to go home is now.
Tonight, officials blocking people from crossing the border into Canada.
The Canadian Border Services Agency is already turning back non-Canadians trying to enter Canada to participate in blockades.
For the past 3 weeks, truckers have been clogging the streets of Ottawa, disrupting daily life, shutting down schools and businesses to protest vaccine mandates and all COVID restrictions. But tonight, the Ambassador Bridge, the busiest land border crossing between the U.S. and Canada, is back open. Police finally clearing the remaining protesters Sunday, arresting more than 24 people. The end to the week-long blockade can't come soon enough for American automakers. Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors all forced to shut down plants and cancel shifts due to the disruption in the supply chains of car parts. David, this new emergency deployment, which will not involve the military removing protesters, could last as long as 30 days. David?
Pierre Thomas tonight. Pierre,
Okay, so there's been plenty of aggressive protests on view in the parts of China that there have been protests in. I think this is just another example of Trudeau trying to take advantage, and Western countries in general trying to take advantage of any social incohesion in countries that are not considered to be allied to NATO and elements like that. Here's just to remind people of how bad it got and how, oh my goodness. Here's it's like something from The Prisoner. This is something from Australia.
A man has been arrested outside a quarantine hotel after escaping from his room. Police say the 24-year-old man was returned to his Tullamarine accommodation without further incident after leaving his room without permission this afternoon.
Good morning. We start with breaking news out of Darwin, where 3 people have escaped from the Howard Springs COVID quarantine facility. Talia Sava's there for us. Talia, good morning. There's a search underway right now.
Now, major police checkpoints have been set up around Howard Springs for the past several hours. As you can see in these pictures, they've been conducting thorough searches in car boots, checking vehicle registrations, cars and buses alike.
It makes no sense, does it?
Yeah, but you can't leave your balcony to go to the fence to talk to somebody else. That's what's obvious, yeah?
So if I was at that balcony...
Make sense. So there has to be lines everywhere drawn, yeah? And one of the lines is you cannot leave your balcony and you cannot go to someone else. Where it makes no sense or it doesn't seem right to you, that is the line, and that's what the law is here.
Give me a minute. Well, what is this in regards to? What's it in regards to? You haven't told me anything. Incitement for what? I told them not to go to the protest. Is it?
Now, you're under arrest in relation to incitement.
Incitement?
Now, you're not obliged to say or do anything, but anything you say or do may be given evidence.
Excuse me, incitement for what? What on earth? Excuse me, what on earth?
So just put your phone down.
Can you like
record
this? I'm in my pajamas.
What's this?
I have an ultrasound in an hour.
Yeah, she's pregnant, so
what was going on around the world just a couple of years ago. And the leaders of these countries now are gloating because of some protests in China. We're very severe lockdown, at times very severe lockdown regulations in parts of China where COVID have been breaking out. I doubt very much that the satisfaction levels of the population in Canada and with Trudeau are anywhere near the satisfaction levels with the socialist government and system in China amongst the population. And that's not according to any Chinese pollsters or pro-Chinese, but it's actually according to Harvard University in the United States, who do regular satisfaction polls on the Chinese population to find out. And, you know, they will take into account things like the possibility of people being in fear, etc., in China. And I think I'm fast finding out that China is not as locked down, is not as militarized, is not as Soviet-like as we are being told in Western media. But in this particular poll, the survey team found that compared to public opinion patterns in the US, in China there was very high satisfaction with the central government. In 2016, the last year the survey was conducted, 95.5% of respondents were either relatively satisfied or highly satisfied with Beijing. In contrast to these findings, Gallup reported in January of this year that their latest poll on US citizen satisfaction with the American federal government revealed only 38% of respondents were satisfied with the federal government. So that is indicative of satisfaction. Now, I'm not saying that this, I didn't take the poll, I haven't seen the methodology of the poll, but it does, again, just call viewers to call into question everything that they're reading. And when they hear statements from people like Trudeau, I don't agree with lockdowns in China or anywhere else, but I don't cheer on the likes of Trudeau when he's criticising protests in China, whilst at the same time suppressing them at home. Any take or opinion on this, Padraig?
I don't know how liberal it is to live in China. You hear stories that it isn't at all. But then again, like I think you've highlighted a couple of times in the last few weeks that that's not all necessarily what it's being presented as. So I'm trying to take a more open mind on that and look into it more and try and get more round views on it. In terms of Trudeau, absolute hypocrisy. He was massive authoritarian around the COVID issue. Lockdowns have been pretty much shown to be a very bad response to pandemics. They never were, even under the World Health Organization's pandemic policies in the past. They were never your go-to for a response, and they're being held strong by China. And people do say that China, being a one-party system and having an authoritarian regime, this is what they say, that they were able to implement lockdown and then it was exported around the world. Well, certainly when it came to different regions, we've seen how authoritarian it was. And Trudeau was an extremist on that, like treat people very, very poorly, like, so absolute hypocrisy. And if people don't remember like what's been going on for these last couple of years, it doesn't matter where you stood on the whole COVID thing. You have to be able to see these things for what they were, like, you know, it's total hypocrisy now.
Yeah. I think, again, just going back to the China aspect of this particular headline for a minute, we say that, you know, the Chinese Communist Party, the one-party system, it means that it's a socialist system, just like we have a capitalist system here. So we might as well call our system the capitalist party system here, you know. There's no way that socialists within the EU can be elected and carry out their manifestos, the actual genuine socialists, because the design of the EU and its laws are to the effect that socialist governments, for instance, the nationalisation of industry, just can't happen under current EU regulations and laws. The nationalisation of service provision that isn't currently nationalised just can't happen under EU laws. So, you know, there are a lot of similarities. I think this is really just about an economic jealousy thing again. I hope that China does lift its lockdown. I'm just concerned that there will be elements outside of China that will try to rise up China or rise up trouble in China through the protests that are happening over lockdowns, as there are always those who will take advantage of those kind of things. Just staying on the COVID narrative for another minute, it would appear that Twitter have stopped COVID-19 misinformation censorship and programs since earlier this month, early in November. Effective November 23rd, 2022, Twitter is no longer enforcing the COVID-19 misleading information policy. That's what's coming up on Twitter platforms at the moment. Any take on this, Padraig?
Yeah, so like censorship is a bad thing in terms of democracy and free speech. But there could be like you could see that an awful lot of stuff that maybe is off the wall coming in too. Like, so look, while I'm against censorship, like people need to be discerning for themselves. Like it is a problem, like with the internet as such, like that information can be shared so widely and it mightn't be well sourced. So, you know, people should be their own filter. I don't believe that it should be done for you, because the problems that come with that then is that, you know, very, very honest and relevant reports are being taken out of circulation, which that's not good.
I think if there was a core tenet in our education system about proper research, about always knowing that will always be more than one side of an argument, to always look at who the funders are, to always look at patterns of legal cases, of claims made against people providing research, etc., and to take all of these things into account. If you don't, you are what I would describe as a naive functionist. You believe in a particular system, that something's supposed to work in a certain way, but you don't take into consideration human failings when it comes to the rolling out of systems. Failings such as greed, such as fear, such as ego, such as pride, all of these things that can input into research motivation, research rollout, research outcomes.